So, uh, I would first like to thank the Gesellschaft für interkulturelle Philosophie for giving me this opportunity to speak in Tübingen. Though not in Hölderlin's tongue, and only in English, and only in e-presence, not in the flesh. Besides, I intend to speak about something rather out of place in Baden-Württemberg, that is a Japanese spatiality, or at least not in Japanese. Be it as it may, I count on our common interest in intercultural exchanges. And please excuse my rather somewhat slurred speech. It is due to a brain hemorrhage which occurred 2 years ago, and my tongue is not so nimble as it ought to be. Japanese spatiality tends to what I call in French e-présence. E is here a Y, not an E. A concept which, though nearly homophonic with the English e-presence, means the contrary, namely being there in the flesh, concretely, on some particular occasion. This is, above all, manifested by the absence in Japanese of the pronoun or mask, persona, the person, the word I, or ich in German, or je in French, etc., can be used by anybody in any situation. The word watashi, which is ordinarily understood as an equivalent of I or me, and written, as you can see in my text, is only a pseudo pronoun, since it can also be an adjective meaning private, like in Shiritsu Daigaku, a private university. Moreover, depending on the speaker and on the situation, watashi is generally replaced with various words and expressions, or not replaced at all. The speech is then performed with a pure blank instead of our I, given, moreover, that the form of the verb does not vary with the person, like in cogito, cogitas, cogitat, etc. Because identifying verbally the speaker is not necessary. The situation as it is felt by concretely being there is enough. In other words, onticity, Seinheit, is self-sufficient, which, of course, for being understood as such, asks for a certain ontology. Let me take the example of Edo, the former name of Tokyo, to illustrate what kind of spatiality this primacy of e-presence entails. The place name Edo, which means door of the bay, was abandoned when Emperor Meiji, leaving Kyoto, moved his capital to this city in 1868, and following Okubo Toshimichi's suggestion, renamed it Eastern Capital, Tokyo. Until then, and since 1603, Edo had been the city down the castle, Jokamachi, of the Tokugawa shogunate. That meant, in fact, that Edo was the administrative or actual capital of Japan, whereas Kyoto remained the religious and symbolic capital. Owing to its political role, and particularly to the Sankin-kotai system, which obliged the daimyo, that is, the feudal lords, to leave their wives and children in Edo when they were in their own provinces. And because of this Sankin-kotai system, Edo, which was a small fishers' village before 1603, rapidly became an enormous city, reaching about 1.5 million inhabitants in the 18th century, which made it one of the biggest cities in human history before the industrial era. Tokyo disoriented me from the first sight in August 1969, coming from Haneda, at the time Tokyo's international airport. I thought we still were in the suburbs, whereas we already were in the CBD, Central Business District, Marunouchi. I soon felt that a singular kind of spatiality was at stake there, and that I would have to find its principle, a task which, for example, the author of Tokyo, 1976, in the Que sais-je collection, Maurice Moreau, was content to give up purely and simply, writing, for example, page 47, that the city was incompréhensible, incomprehensible. Yet this principle exists, but it took, this principle does not fit into the main Western mental categories. It took me about half a century before I could qualify it with the concept of e-présence, the meaning of which is akin to that of the German Dasein, or better, the Spanish estancia, that is, the fact of being concretely somewhere and or at a certain moment, that is, in Spanish, estar, rather than ser, a distinction which is ignored by the English be, the French être, or the German sein. The said spatiality is a matter of space as it is concretely lived, espace vécu in French, not abstractly conceived of like the famous orthogonal plan of Hippodamos in Miletos, which was uniformly applied without the least consideration for the local relief nor the line of the coast. On the contrary, the streets of Edo were systematically oriented according to visible landmarks, that is, landmarks which were visible at the time when these streets were first oriented. It is precisely because many of these landmarks have disappeared, like the dungeon of the shogun's castle, which burned during the Great Fire of Meiriki era in 1657, and which was not rebuilt, or are presently hidden by modern high-rise buildings, that it has become difficult to understand why the streets of Tokyo are oriented in such a way. For understanding their singular pattern, I have needed not only to read, but to translate the seminal book of Maki and others on the spatiality with which Tokyo has inherited from Edo. I have also needed to understand that the sinogram yo, read you in Japanese, which is generally translated with being in philosophy, is rather the ontic Daseiende. That is, what there is existing concretely for a certain being in certain circumstances. In other words, it is phenomenal, not substantial or in itself, an sich. Japanese researchers, Maki and others in this instance, as for them, have rather compared the said spatiality with the practice of sakke, landscape borrowing, in garden art, that is, using the surrounding landscape to set off the beauty of one's garden. Yet, this is just another expression of the same ontological principle, a relational conception of what there is, aru, concretely situated in space-time. And it is precisely this principle which is difficult to grasp for a Western mind, although a Western language like Spanish implies continually that question with the difference it makes between ser, being in itself, and estar, being casually. For example, Dario es moreno. Dario is dark, dark-haired. But el campo está todo blanco. Nevó mucho ayer. The countryside is all white. It snowed a lot yesterday. On the other hand, as can be seen, English does not make this distinction. Both translations of these two sentences use the same verb, be. The Japanese language possesses several words implying more or less what I call e-presence, such as baso, a place, bamen, a scene, a site, or baai, a case, an occasion, or circumstances. As one can see, these words all comprise the element ba, a word which, when it is alone, means room, like in baotoru, take up a lot of room. An occasion, a situation, a field in physics, a session, a market, a seat, a scene, etc. Babai, which we just have seen, is thus literally a meeting and according, i.e., al, of different ba. This is akin to the etymology of contingency, the Latin contingere, like tangere, touch, happen. A reason why I prefer to translate that word, contingency, with baise rather than with guzense, as it is generally done, since guzen translates chance, accident, a notion which in English implies singularity, whereas in Japanese gu implies a relation, for example, that of two halves in gusu, an even number, whereas an uneven number is kisu. Basho and bamen are two particularly important topics in modern Japanese thought. Basho no Rondi, logic of place, also called logic of the predicate, Jutsugo Rondi, as opposed to the Aristotelian logic of the identity of the subject. That Basho no Rondi was at the core of Nishida Kitaro's philosophical system, Note that I give here the names of Japanese persons in the normal order with the patronymic first. Nishida. Nishida's philosophical system, like Tokiyada Motoki's grammar of the Japanese language, which centers on the process of language, Gengo Kate, show that in this language, the type of the enunciation depends on the bamen, literally the aspect of a ba. The casualness or contingency of this situationism, which requires the concreteness of e-presence, typically implies to the notion of ma, which is both spatial and temporal, as instantiated in the following expressions. Mamonaku, literally without a ma, and means soon, presently, before long. Ma or oku, put a pose. Ma ga yokereba, which means if things go well, if the timing is right. Depending on the context, the sinogram tian, read kan or aida or ma in Japanese, can also be read aida, an interval, a space. The relations, like in aidagara, literally relational body, that is, relationship with other people. Another reading of that sinogram, awai, reveals its relation with au, which I've seen. Hamaguchi Eishun qualified Japanese culture as an awai no bunka, a culture of awai, that is, a culture of meeting and courting. In composition with hito, the person, people, humankind, ma keeps its onyomi, that is, a reading phonetically derived from the Chinese qian. This combination has given ningen, a human being, humankind, humanity. Yet Watsuji, the philosopher Watsuji, interpreting this word literally as the human interlink, put it at the core of his ethics, and thus entitled his 1934 seminal book, Ningen no gaku toshite no rinrigaku, Ethics as the study of the human intellect. Published in the following year, 1935, Fudo, Human Milieu, is subtitled Ningen-gakuteki kosatsu, Considerations on the Human Intellect. As written in the first line of this book, it aims at elucidating fudose, the concept of fudose, defined as in the first line, on the first line, as the structural moment of human existence. Ningen sonzai no kozo keiki. In the following pages appears the word aidagara, which in Fudo seems not to be limited to a relationship with other people, but to be also the relationship we have with the things of our milieu or Umwelt, whereas one does not have that relationship with the objects of a Cartesian extensio. And extensio, which is the raw data of the environment, or Umgebung. This implies that a human milieu or Umwelt is fraught with feeling and meaning. Obviously, Watsuji's mythology, Fudogaku, corresponds, as for humans, to Uexkull's Umweltlehre, as for animals, or can we say today, for the living in general. Yet, the Watsuji refers to Heidegger, who was decisively influenced by Uexkull. It does not mention Uexkull, and this correspondence is perhaps no more than a coincidence. Be it as it may, all that we have seen up to now reveals that Japanese spatiality tends to the casualness of phenomenality. It radically differs from the universalness assumed by the modern classic Western paradigm, hereafter abridged as the MCWP, which, about 3 centuries after Galileo's trial, eventually entailed the ideology of the modern movement in architecture, illustrated by such concepts as universal space or international style, but whose ancestor may well be the Aristotelian definition of topos as an immobile vase. Angeion ametakineton. In physics, 4. For that reason, a topos can be separated from what it locates, something which, on the contrary, is mobile and keeps its identity even when moved to another topos. Effectively, the MCWP's architectural objects can be displaced anywhere on this planet, while keeping the identity, therefore. This is precisely the principle of the international style. The topos has no interlink, Aidagara, with what is there. It is no more than a Stelle, as Heidegger might have said, I suppose. On the contrary, what Plato wrote about Chora in the Timaeus shows that it has an ontological relationship with what is there and what Plato calls genesis. Indeed, Chora is both the imprint, ekmageia, and the matrix, mother, mater, or wet nurse, titane, of Genesis, literally, which means literally birth, that is, the event of relative being. For the above reasons, I see in Chora an ancestor of milieu in the sense of Umwelt, for living beings in general, or Fudo, for human beings in particular. In the first lines of Basso, Nishida compares Basso with Plato's Chora, while significantly making the mistake of conceiving the latter as the latter, that is Chora, as he writes, that which receives the ideas, idea or uketoru mono. Whereas for Plato, Chora receives only an image, that is relative being, which needs Chora for existing. Whereas Plato's idea or eidos, transcends time and space and exists just an sich, itself. True, Nishida adds that it does not identify Basho and Hora, but manifestly it does not imagine such a thing as absolute being, is eidos or idea. On the contrary, what he absolutizes is mu, that is, nihility. And this absolute nihility, or negation, not only negates being, you, but by negating itself, produces being. Needless to say, since Nishida was a Zen practitioner, this mu owes much to the Buddhist void, in Japanese ku. The Aristotelian topos, in which the things which happen to be there keep their own identity independently from it, has much to do with the no less Aristotelian excluded third party principle, which for more than 2 millennia has been the guideline of the European way of thinking, and especially that of the MCWP. It produced, among others, the Cartesian binary distinction between res extensa and res cogitans. In other words, the dualism of subject and object. Now, this principle excludes the possibility that the objects of the environment, die Umgebung in Uexküll's words, which are what they are in themselves, an sich, be at the same time the different things of a milieu, an Umwelt. Uexküll has called this process Tönung, that is, tinting. For example, the same tuft of grass will exist in the tone of food, S-tone, for a cow, in the tone of an obstacle, Hindernis tone, for an ant, in the tone of a shelter, Schutzton, for a beetle, etc. We thus need another principle than the above excluded third party and its correlative dualism for conceiving how an object can become a thing, an environment can become a milieu, or an Umgebung can become an Umwelt. 40 years ago, when I was writing my first essay on the Japanese milieu, I had to forge the word trajection for expressing the ontological process which makes that possible, together with the correlated adjective trajectif, or trajective in the feminine. Logically, trajection is analogous to a predication, yet it is not binary, since S, the subject, is not P, the predicate in itself, an sich. It is ternary, since S is P for a certain interpreter, I, in the English pronunciation. We have thus not a binary relation, S equal P, but a ternary relation, S/P, in which the slash S represents E, the interpreter, and is read as, like S as P. Let us remember, by the way, that this physicist's object, what is observed, corresponds to the logician's subject, what the matter is about. Yet when we say S is P, we do not mean that the identity of S is substantially that of P. What we mean is rather that the identity of S exists, gets off out of itself in order to become, to exist as that of P. This process might probably be expressed in Spanish as es esta P, no es P. I rendered trajection in Japanese with tsutai, a neologist, combining the idea of going to and fro, kayo, between the two theoretical poles of the objective and the subjective, and tai, which means a certain state, like in taido, an attitude, a manner. In this perspective, reality is neither purely objective, the object S in itself, nor purely subjective, a mere dream or fantasy. It is trajective. This is expressed by the formula R equal S/P, which reads, reality is S as P. In Renaissance French, that is, for example, in Montaigne, there existed a verb, trajecter, meaning to transport. This verb does not exist anymore, but we still use in French trajet, which means distance or route in English. Trajection, we can pronounce it in English, trajection, then has something to do with what Heidegger called entfernung, which is in fact the contrary of a geometric distance. We can find an analogical idea in the ordinary Japanese word barai, case, occasion, which, as we have seen, literally means a meeting and according, of different ba, or stances. In trajection, tsutai, a meets non-a, and accords when a meets non-a. And accords with it. Not in itself, of course, but according to the circumstances. And it is this process of concrescence, growing together, concrescere, which is illustrated by Japanese spatially. I do not refer here to Whitehead, but only to the etymology of the word concrescere, concrescence.